Well, it's pretty obvious that racial relations in the United States are at a pretty low point. They're probably in the worst state that they've been in since at least the LA riots back in the early 90s, and maybe since the 1960s. Now, recent events in Charlottesville, which of course you're all aware of, have exacerbated these tensions further, and there have been a lot of attacks from the left saying that Donald Trump is enabling and supporting white supremacists. Now, of course, Donald Trump never did enable or support white supremacists. A lot of people voted for Donald Trump who did have those ideas, but a lot of white supremacists voted for other GOP politicians in the past and voted for a lot of other Democratic politicians in the past. Now, what I'm going to show you here exposes the selective outrage that members of the left, the Democratic Party, the media, and even some members of the right have when analyzing the racial leanings of certain politicians. In the very recent past, during the race for the Democratic National Committee, a number of Democrats, a large number of Democrats, supported Keith Ellison. And a large number of people supported him, both kind of on the radical fringe and closer to the middle. Now, Keith Ellison openly called for a black ethnostate. As a third-year student in the University of Minnesota Law School in 1989 to 1990, he wrote 2 columns for the Minnesota Daily under the name Keith Hackam. In the first, Ellison refers to Minister Louis Farrakhan, defends Nation of Islam spokesman Khalid Abdul Muhammad, and speaks in the voice of a Nation of Islam advocate. In the second, Hakeem Ellison demands reparations for slavery and throws in a demand for an optional separate homeland for American blacks. One defense you could use for this is that Ellison was a young man. You know, a lot of people say a lot of silly things when they're teenagers or adolescents. But Keith Ellison at this point was in law school. This was a man in his early 20s. I mean, by the time you get in your early 20s, your political leanings, especially if you're a politically active person, as Keith Ellison was and is, are usually pretty solidified. So, from this, his advocacy for a black ethnostate, we can definitely see that he at least has some leanings, and there are definitely at least some questions about Keith Ellison. Now, is it possible that he no longer believes in this? Yes, it's possible. I mean, he's trying to be a relatively mainstream Democratic politician, so obviously he can't call for this now. But just let's flip the script for a minute. Let's do a little thought experiment. Let's imagine that a Republican was running for the head of the RNC, and this Republican had ties to David Duke, you know, like Ellison had to Farrakhan, they are just as extreme figures. And when he was a law school graduate, called for a white ethnostate and the separation of races. And this guy quieted down since then, but that was in the public record. Now, what do you think the reaction of both the left wing and the establishment of the Republican Party would have been? That guy, that theoretical guy, would have got demolished, and he would not have gotten anywhere near the head of the Republican National Committee. Not anywhere near it. The media would have piled on, saying that the Republican Party was becoming a neo-Nazi organization, and there would have been an onslaught, a torrential downpour of negative press upon that person and the party in general, and anybody who supported him would have been branded as a neo-Nazi white supremacist, and their careers would have never recovered. And also, keep in mind that the fact that Keith Ellison called for an ethnostate was public knowledge since 2006, and was brought up again weeks before the vote for the head of the Democratic National Committee. And despite that, these people endorsed him. John Burton, the head of the California State Party. Eric Bauman, California State Party Vice Chair. Tim Vandeveer, Hawaii State Party Chair. Karen Yarberg, Illinois State Party Vice Chair. Cordelia Lewis Burks, Indiana State Party Vice Chair. Danny Homan, former Iowa State Party first Vice Chair. Philip Bartlett, Maine State Chair. Victoria Jackson Stanley, Maryland State Party Vice Chair. Ken Martin, Minnesota State Party Chair. Marge Hoppa, Minnesota State Party Vice Chair. Brandon Dillon, Michigan State Party Chair. And I'm not going to keep going through all of the state chairs that endorsed Keith Ellison, but there are a lot more. In the leadership of the Democratic Party, Dan O'Neill, the Arizona Democratic Party Executive Board Member. R.T. Ryback, DNC Vice Chair. Hilda Solis, former U.S. Secretary of Labor. Jim Zogby, DNC Executive Committee Member. Arnett Taddeo, DNC Executive Committee Member, Florida. Here are some U.S. senators that endorsed ethnostate advocate Keith Ellison. U.S. Senate Minority Leader Chuck Schumer. Former U.S. Senate Minority Leader Harry Reid. U.S. Senator Maze Hirono. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders, U.S. Senator Elizabeth Warren, U.S. Senator Martin Heinrich, U.S. Senator Tammy Baldwin, U.S. Senator Al Franken, U.S. Senator Chris Murphy, U.S. Senator Tammy Duckworth. And you've got a plethora of representatives, of members of the House of Representatives, who endorsed Keith Ellison, this black ethno-state advocate. Huge number of state and national leaders of the Democratic Party endorsed Keith Ellison. And here are some organizations that endorsed the ethno-state advocate Keith Ellison. United Steelworkers, Alliance for Retired Americans, American Federation of Government Employees, Americans for Democratic Action, Bend the Arc Jewish Action, Communications Workers of America, DC for Democracy, Democracy for America, Democracy Spring, Friends of the Earth Action, Food and Water Watch, 350 Action, Center for Popular Democracy Action, Good Jobs Nation, MoveOn.org, Our Revolution, that's Bernie Sanders' organization, People's Action Network, Progressive Change Campaign Committee, Progressive Democrats of America, Working Families Party, Social Security Works, Unite Here, United Automobile, Aerospace, and Agricultural Implement Workers of America. There are way too many people and organizations that supported Keith Ellison, the black ethno-state advocate for the head of the Democratic National Committee, than I can list. Suffice it to say that the mainstream media and mainstream politicians, basically all politicians actually, have a glaring and enormous double standard when it comes to race relations and politicians in the United States. Donald Trump says one or two things about illegal immigrants, and he is a neo-Nazi white supremacist who is enabling the rise of fascism in the United States. The Democratic Party almost nominates a guy who openly called for a black ethno-state in America for the head of the Democratic National Committee, and barely gets any attention. I mean, you're a right-wing loon if you think that this is a problem. So don't pay attention to the media when they say that Donald Trump is enabling neo-Nazi white supremacists. Or if you do think that he does, if you do truly think that what Donald Trump has done merits being condemned as an enabler of white supremacy, then if you're being logically consistent, you must condemn Keith Ellison much more strongly. And along with condemning Keith Ellison, you must also condemn all of the groups and individuals that supported him. There's an enormous double standard in the American political discourse for right-wing and left-wing politicians when it comes to race relations.